Alexandra here at Newfoundland Counseling. In this video, I'm going to talk about anger. A lot of times when we're suffering, we experience intense anger, particularly if the suffering was unexpected, like the loss of a loved one, or we're chronically suffering. And what we do with our anger is we often direct it at God, and we either blame God for what's going on, or we start asking the why question. Why, God? Why are you allowing me to suffer in this way? If you love me, why did this happen to me? And then once we ask this, once we get stuck on the why God, then we can really get stuck in our anger and it becomes unproductive anger. When we get angry at God, sometimes we do that to discharge the emotions that we're feeling, right? Usually anger is driven by an intense emotion like feelings of abandonment or betrayal. But what we end up feeling is just the anger. And then we send that at God. And then we say, why God? When we do this to God, though, we often just leave it there and don't realize what God does with our anger. Of course, God is going to take our anger, but what is actually happening? What is God giving us in return for our anger? And here's how I like to think of it. We get the idea that God is love. And when we get angry at God, we forget that God is love. And what does that mean when we shoot anger at God? Well, it's like this. God is love, and his love extends. Like it encompasses all of what God is. And so when we shoot angry arrows at God, whether we cuss at God or we're very, very angry at him and we just send all of our hatred towards God, God's love takes those arrows that were shot towards him and his love dissolves them. And I think this way to think about it is so amazing because what better thing to happen with our anger? We send it to God. His love consumes it for us. And then what is left for us? But God's love. That's what God does for us when we send anger to Him. He says, yeah, I'll take that. I'll hold that for you. I'll even get rid of that for you because I'm love. And then I'm going to offer you love. But what is our response after we've sent anger up to God? It's to then turn away. We place the blame on God because we expect that God's going to fix it for us. We think, wow, like God's love, right? He's going to fix the problem for us. If I just pray to God and ask Him to stop this thing, He will. And then when He doesn't, we feel really betrayed by God. And that's totally understandable, right? Because we know that God is the ultimate healer, the ultimate protector. And we feel hurt when He doesn't help us, He doesn't heal us, when He doesn't bring back our loved one. We get really angry because we're really hurt. And so then what we do is we turn away from God, which is the exact opposite response than what God wants us to do. It's also the response that will be the least productive for us because we need God on our side. We need God's love. And when we turn away from God in our anger, we turn away from God's love. We turn away from the very source that can help us. And that can lead us down some really dangerous paths. So if you find yourself turning to God in anger, that's okay. But be careful about the why God. When you reach the point that you're stuck on the anger and why God did you allow this to happen to me? First and foremost, remembering what does God do with anger and what does God give you back after you send anger at him? But also then rephrasing the question. What good is the why God question anyway? Where does it lead but confusion and more hurt and abandonment and feelings of betrayal? We don't always get the why God. God's not going to write us a letter that says, "Hey, these are all the reasons that I allowed this suffering to happen to you." Sometimes that can happen as life continues to unfold. We can get clarity on why a suffering happens. But in the moment of suffering, we're not going to get the answer to that question. Rather, we should be asking more productive questions like, okay, God, you allowed this terrible suffering to happen to me. How can I endure this suffering? What is it that you want me to learn in this suffering? Also, how can I be a recipient of your love? What can I do with this anger that I feel, God? We so often give in to the anger. We let the anger ultimately determine our way forward. And then we get lost. It is okay. to be angry. It is okay to send angry feelings up towards God. He is ready. He has his love there, his atmosphere of love ready to dissolve your anger. And he's ready to offer you love because that's what God is. He's love. We just need to accept it. We need to ask the right question. Let go of the why God. In the middle of suffering, it is not the time to ask that. In the middle of suffering, that's the time to find ways that we can endure the suffering, that we can accept God's love, and that we can maybe even pray more productively with God for how to do the things that He's asking us to do in the middle of our suffering.